I'd like to introduce our speaker, Skye Lacerte. Skye is a curator and archivist who has served as curator of the Dowd Modern Graphic History Library at Washington University in St. Louis since 2008. She works with original materials by some of the 19th and 20th century's most well-known illustrators and graphic artists, and has consistently increased holdings, growing the library from 6 collections to over 60. She has also led numerous projects to increase visibility and accessibility of the Modern Graphic History Library's collections, including the digitization of the Walsh Reed Illustration Archive. Skye studied art history at UC Irvine and went on to earn a master's degree in library and information science at San Jose State University. As curator, her goal is to elevate the visibility of the Dowd Modern Graphic History Library, as well as the legitimacy of visual culture in meaningful scholarship. Her talk today is about the recently processed Rose O'Neill collection in the D.B. Dowd Modern Graphic History Library in the Washington University Libraries. So without further ado, join me in virtually welcoming Skye Lacerte.
Thank you, Shannon, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really excited to be talking to you about the newly processed Rose O'Neill collection. So tonight I'm going to give you basically a little sneak preview of the items that are in the collection that were donated to us by the Rose O'Neill Foundation. I'm by no means a Rose O'Neill expert, but I'm a big fan, and so I'm really excited that the materials are now available for use. So before we take a look at the collection, I'd just like to share a little biography and background information on Rose O'Neill. Rose was born in 1874 in Nebraska and started drawing for major publications in her early teens. Her illustrations and cartoons were published on the pages of Life, Harper's Bazaar, Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, and many, many other magazines. In 1896, her comic strip titled The Old Subscriber Calls was published in Truth magazine. It's here on the left, and it's believed to be the first known published comic strip created by a woman. Her cartoons became so popular that she was asked to join the staff of the magazine called Puck, seen here on the right, where she was the only woman working from 1897 to 1903. So she was definitely a true pioneer. I get a lot of questions about women working as illustrators at this time, since it's such a male-dominated field, like most professions back then. So unfortunately, women had to sometimes conceal their gender by signing works under different names or their initials. And in Rose's case, she did use R.C. O'Neill instead of Rose for a while. And this afforded her and other women artists at the time many more opportunities. O'Neill's most popular creation was the Kewpie. I think you've all seen the Kewpie before. Kewpies first appeared in 1909, although you can see similar figures in a lot of her work that came before them. And we're going to see some examples of those works tonight. The Kewpies were named after the Roman god of love, Cupid, and they were little impish creatures. They sported a top-knot hairstyle, and they were super cute. In fact, O'Neill has often been referred to as the Queen of Cute. The Kewpies were so successful that she began producing dolls for sale. And over the next several years, O'Neill became a millionaire from the sales of the dolls, allowing her to afford homes in New York, excuse me, Connecticut, Missouri, and Italy. So on your screen on the left here is a microfilm printout from a newspaper in which the Kewpies appeared. And on the right are 2 illustrations. These are the original illustrations that went into this page on the left. You can see that it was from the bottom of the page. So here's this one, and here is this original illustration. And if we overlay it on top, it gives you a better idea of how they fit in together. Meanwhile, O'Neill continued her career in illustration and became the top artist for Jell-O, in addition to creating ads for several other companies like Eastman Kodak and Kellogg's. Beginning in 1915, while living with her sister in an apartment in New York's Greenwich Village, O'Neill became involved with the women's suffrage movement. So she did things like she marched in parades, she gave speeches, and she also illustrated posters for the movement, like this poster on the right from the Norman Rockwell Museum. Rose had always been a nonconformist. She didn't usually fit the stereotype of women at the turn of the century and rejected the typical beauty standards of the time. And she preferred flowing robes to corsets, and she most often didn't pin up her hair. During her time in New York, she was part of the artists' social scene and hosted many struggling artists monetarily. The image on the left is a portrait of Rose by James Montgomery Flagg, one of the artists that she socialized with back then. And you'll know him best from this poster, which is also in our collection in our World War I Atkin family poster collection. In 1927, Rose returned to her family's home in Missouri near Springfield and eventually settled here permanently. And her family's homestead was called Bonnie Brook. That's what they called it. By the 1940s, she had lost a majority of her money and properties, partly through extravagant spending, as well as the cost of fully supporting her family, other artists, and even her first husband. She died in 1944, and you can still visit Bonnie Brook down near Branson. There's a museum, a gallery, and then you can also tour the home. So that was basically a short little biography of Rose O'Neill. And so in 2018, we were really thrilled to be contacted by the Rose O'Neill Foundation, and they offered to donate some of her work to us. So special thanks goes to David O'Neill, Donna Davis, and Susan Wilson. They all worked together to help make the transaction happen. And from that, we received a nice sampling of different facets from her career, from books to periodical illustration and advertising, and also fine art. So now I'm going to start the show and tell portion of the evening. And along the way, I'm going to add some context if I have it, as well as my personal observations. The first thing we're going to look at is books. And here is the first book I'm showing. This is called Clever Betsy by Clara Lewis Burnham. This is a romance novel. The women on the left here, this is an illustration printed on the interior of the book. This is a page from the book. This is the cover of the book, obviously. And the woman here on the left is Betsy, and her protege Rosalie is on the right. And here is the original illustration that's now in our collection. This is made with ink wash, and pencil on board, and is approximately 20 inches tall. The book is only about 8 inches tall, so you can see how the large artwork is before being reproduced, how large the artwork is before being reproduced for the work, for the book. In the top right-hand corner up here, O'Neill wrote a caption that appears in the book, slightly changed, as well as the page number that it appears on. One thing I really appreciate about Rose O'Neill is her meticulous marking of her works, and that really helps us to identify and catalog the work in our collection. Many other artists throughout the 20th century did not help us identify their work by providing that information on it. So it's something we really appreciate. And it's sometimes those little things that endear me to an artist, like her handwriting and how neat it is, as well as the act of her recording this information. Right, the next book in the collection we're looking at is called Peter, Peter, A Romance Out of Town. And this is another romance novel. The book is about a love triangle, and it deals with the differences between rich and poor people. And again, here's the cover on the left, and this is a page from the book with an illustration on it. And this is the photographic print, the photographic proof for the illustration. You'll notice the writing down here. It was probably the publisher's or the printer's notation, because it doesn't look like Rose O'Neill's writing at all. And it's referring to halftone printing. And just to explain what that is, to begin explaining it, one of the reasons that illustration became so widespread at the end of the 19th century is that there were improvements in printing technology. Halftone is a process that made printing much easier and quicker for mass production, and it also was able to recreate the artist's work more accurately. And I'll talk a little bit more about halftone in just a second. But first, I wanted to show you this very close picture. So I took this with a digital microscope that we have here, and I just wanted you to see what this looks like if you look really closely at it. And remember this when we look at the same thing on the printed page in the book. So again, here's the printed page, and you'll see that in this image, how the use of shading and a range of tones are being used. Halftone allowed for an infinite range of grays to achieve the accurate reproduction of a drawing or a photograph. And it does this through dots. So when you zoom in, like with another microscope, this is done with that same digital microscope, this is what the baby's face looks like. The halftone process refers to basically the graduation of tone that faithfully reproduces the photographs, drawings, and paintings. And so what it is there's a screen placed between the lens and the plate, which has the image etched on it. And it breaks up that picture into a multitude of dots. So when you examine it closely like this, you're going to see a series of tiny dots and lines that produce the image and create the tone. And you can see it here even closer. So what's interesting about this, it's sort of an optical illusion. It's so small, and then when you stand back, you don't notice the dots at all, you just see the image. And here's another page from the same book, and this one is not printed in halftone, so you can see the difference here. It's basically black and white. Also, this book was published in January of 1909. So this was just before the Kewpies appeared for the first time. And you can see the hints of the Kewpies in these babies in the picture. This one has a hammer, so I'm wondering what's going on. Nobody seems to be paying attention. So anyway, that's that picture. And since I had the microscope out, I just thought I would take a look at the gold foil stamping on the front cover of the book. So that's what that looked like from our earlier slide. And then here's the microscopic view. Just thought that was fun. All right, so there's a lot of more items from the book category, but you'll have to come in and see those for yourself, because we're going to move on to periodicals now. And this is where most of the materials in the collection fall. First off, there's numerous tear sheets like this one in the collection. This one's from Ladies' Home Journal from December of 1910. And a tear sheet is just refers to the separated pages of a magazine. And they were often sent to illustrators to keep in their portfolios, but other people collected them as well. And this is good as a good example of the next advancement in halftone printing process, which is the addition of color. And it's called the 3 or 4 color process, which is basically the halftone process plus the use of color filters. And I took a picture with the microscope. The process is produced by using 3 different plates, one for printing yellow, one for red, and one for blue. And then in the 4 color process, a black plate or an extra red plate is also used. So like I said, this is another microscopic view, and then we can blow it up even further. And you can see what it looks like. You can't even tell that it creates an image. So I'm going to show you a few more magazine covers now. This one is from one of her earlier cover illustrations for Life magazine from 1896. And this is around the time that she moved to New York. This is a cover from when she worked at Puck, and it's from 1901. I was really curious about this illustration because there's a small boy smoking a cigar, and I wasn't sure what this was all about. So the caption below mentioned that the little boy wants to grow up and work for a man named Dick Croker when he grows up. So I looked him up, and it turns out that Mr. Croker was an incredibly corrupt political leader who became wealthy by accepting bribes and passing laws that were going to financially benefit himself and his businesses. So it's just a fun, interesting thing to how much I can learn, how much I do learn about history from looking at those popular magazines. Here's a cover from the St. Louis Republic in 1910 around the 4th of July. One thing I love about this one is how she has incorporated her signature as part of, coming out of the shadow underneath the boy. So those were some covers from the collection, and now I wanted to look at some illustrations that appeared on the inside of the pages of magazines. And the following works all appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine. The next 3 images are going to be from a fiction story called The Harmonious Child. This is another one from that story. And these are all the original illustrations. And here's another one. This is one of my favorites. It's so beautifully rendered, all the little details. And then the kitten just adds like another charming touch to it. The caption here reads, "She writes his first love letter for him." So this is a work that's drawn on paper. So you can see how brittle and discolored the edges are. It's probably because it's from acidic paper. And so what we do sometimes is just matte things so that it keeps them from deteriorating more quickly. But even with the acidic paper and with like how much time has passed, it's actually pretty stable condition. All right, this illustration was published in July 1929 issue of Cosmopolitan called Green as in Envy. Yeah, I'd say it's very green. And you'll see it's published here. These are the tear sheets for that story. The green's not as bright as the original that you can see here. And there it is printed here, but you can still tell it's green. And this is a great example of something that was really common and popular in magazines from the 1920s and 1930s, which was 2-color illustration on magazine interiors. So it's just basically gray and 1 extra color. These are from a story called Youth by Sinclair Lewis, appearing in Cosmo as well. This one and the next image after this. It really strikes me, this one, how many gestures are happening. Obviously, it's really important for illustrations to reflect what's happening in the stories. That's why illustrators were hired. And so sometimes you can't really tell what's going on, but there are things happening, and I kind of always wonder what's actually going on. It's just kind of a funny thing. And this is from the same story. Another good example of an instance where I'd really love to know what's going on in the story. But we can't obviously read every story that's published in magazines. It would take too long. But I really want to know what's up with this turnip. If anybody knows, please put it in the chat if someone has any knowledge of this story, or make a wild guess and put that in the chat if you want. And another thing I like is how she has changed, or she's adapted her signature to be like a pencil line, basically, instead of the ink that was sort of dripped before. So there are a few original pieces that we haven't yet identified, but we do have some information. So like this one, we know it was from Cosmopolitan, and the date written on it was August 1930. It's just a matter of looking through the magazines to find out exactly what the story is and when it was published, etc. And here we have another note from O'Neill with instructions for the printer. This is from the left-hand bottom corner. Here's another one, Unknown, from Cosmopolitan from around 1930. And one more, another Cosmopolitan, Unknown story. All right, so we also have a lot of works that appeared in Good Housekeeping. This first one is for a story called A Child Shall Lead Them from December 1925. And this one is for a story that was published in 1931. And we have at least 2 illustrations from this story. This is the first one. This and the following image have a lot of different characters and facial expressions going on. There's just a lot happening. So here's another one from that story. All the items in the background give you some information about the people in the picture, which is kind of nice. Like this picture of portrait of the Virgin Mary might mean, you know, they're some type of Catholic religion maybe. And same with food sitting out on the table. It's probably for a party or for a large family. So things like that you can start sort of use as props to give evidence for what these people are. And you'll see here this space in the center, this kind of little washed out space right here. This is where the gutter would be. And the gutter is basically the bound sections or the inner margins of a publication. So when you're looking at it in the magazine, the image would be on separate pages and the fold would be in the middle, and that's what that is. This is another one that wasn't explicitly labeled, but because of the picture, especially the portrait of Virgin Mary and some of the similar characters, I'm making the conclusion that this was also part of that same story. And this type of research would be really great if somebody wants to come and do that sometime and help us identify some of the images, or if you happen to know of a resource for that, that would be great. We do our best, but we can't spend so much time on it since we have more collections to process. It can also maybe have been from a series that appeared in several issues of the magazine. Same with this illustration. I have no identifying marks on it, but because of the setting and the characters, I feel like it comes from the same story, especially because of this woman and how it appears she was in 2 of the other pictures too. So with her shawl and her hairstyle, I feel like it's probably the same woman. All right, so this is from May of 1931 from a story called A Hug Me Tight with Sleeves. Both this and the previous Pink Bassinet story were part of a series by the author Leonora Mattingly Weber. She later published the series. So this was a series of stories about the same people. And that was published as the book called Mr. Gold and Her Neighborhood House. It was published in 1933. And some of those later editions had the Rosa O'Neill illustrations in them as well. I also learned what a hug me tight is. And if you're interested, it's basically a knitted kind of a cropped jacket with no sleeves, usually sleeveless, but you could get it with sleeves, I guess, and you'd wear it underneath your coat for added warmth. This story is called Little Girl with the Grown-Up Eyes from Good Housekeeping in May 1932. You'll see this gutter separation is much more obvious here, and it also helps with the composition by separating, the person outside with the people inside, and also who's the wall and the door right here. So I thought I'd show you a closer view of this illustration. You can look at O'Neill's technique a little bit. And of course, why not get the microscope out? And here's a view of a microscopic view of that drawing. And finally, we have another unidentified illustration. This one, another one that wasn't explicitly marked, but as I was doing this putting this presentation together, I thought it might actually go with the harmonious child. So again, this is the picture we looked at earlier. And again, it would just take some time looking through the magazines to figure out exactly what it was published in. All right, the last two sections are much smaller than the other two we looked at, but they're still very noteworthy. The first is advertising. And as I mentioned before, and as many of you probably know, Rose O'Neill was one of the top Jello artists. This is an advertisement from the collection from 1921. One thing that's interesting to note here is that during this time, the fiction illustrations in the book, the story illustrations, were almost entirely grayscale or two color. And advertisements and covers were where you would find the full page, full color illustrations. So because of that, ads and covers were usually reserved for the most popular and successful illustrators. And here's a later ad from 1933 for Oxidol, which I guess is a household soap or cleanser. It's a good illustration of a common theme in advertisements throughout the 20th century. Basically, one woman has it all figured out. The other one is struggling and pathetic. But the together woman has the secret to make your life better. And that secret is this product. And finally, we have one last category, and we have one item in this category from Rose O'Neill's fine art work. So once she gained a lot of success with the Cupies and her illustrations, she was able to explore her fine art abilities and began making these drawings and sculptures of what she termed were sweet monsters. They supposedly came to her in her dreams. She said these were based on her interest in the evolution of man from the animal origins. And so this is a print from print of her work. It was a drawing titled Eternal Gesture, which was a drawing in a Paris exhibition. And I found a write-up of the exhibition from the time that reads, American woman who made funny Cupies astonished Paris with her powerful symbolism. And as I said, this is our only item from her fine art period, but it is very noteworthy still. So that was a glimpse of the collection, a very short overview. And I just wanted to show you, this is kind of what the collection looks like now that it's been processed. And I'd like to acknowledge our visual materials archivist, Andrea Degner. She's done all of the work to prepare and catalog this and make it accessible to our researchers. And we're going to put a link in the chat where you can find more information about the Rose O'Neill collection specifically. And from that page, you can find links to more digital images, as well as the finding aid for this collection, which will give you just a listing basically of everything that you can come in and see in person. And speaking of coming in person, normally you could come in to view our materials, but for the past year and a half, due to COVID, we're only open to Washington University faculty, students, and staff. But we're hoping that we can start allowing researchers back soon. And we're also here virtually to help. So feel free to contact me anytime. And if you're in the area, if you're not in the area, I can help you with your research from afar. And then hopefully someday when you're in the area, you can come by and view the materials in person. And so this is our website address for the entire Modern Graphic History Library collection. And we're going to put that in the chat too. And I would be happy to answer your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. We have a couple of questions already in the chat or in the Q&A. Esley asked if are popular magazines such as Cosmopolitan easily available in libraries anymore?
Unfortunately, they're not. A lot of people have not saved them, so they're physically not available. And many magazines, just because of the sheer volume of how many there were, a lot of them have not been digitized, so they're not available in online databases either. The most common way you can find things is through microfilm, but then you're getting really poor images. They weren't creating microfilm to capture image, they were capturing text, so they're usually not very good reproductions. So that's kind of why we exist, so we can start collecting these things and make them available to people.
Makes sense. And who else has Rose O'Neill material?
A lot of places, actually. So I think one of the things when the collections were donated to us, the foundation wanted to make sure that there would be as many people as possible who could see her work. So they donated to many other organizations like the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I think Ohio State University, many other museums that I can't think of the names right now, but yeah.
That makes sense. So obviously the foundation wanted to make sure to share her work broadly so people would be aware of it. Is there a particular reason that they found the Dowd Modern Graphic History Library?
Yes, so a curator from another museum, actually, it's funny because this museum is in another state, and they were talking to them, and that curator was like, well, you need to give stuff to, the Dowd Modern Graphic History Library, since they're in Missouri, and the foundation had never heard of us before. So it was a great little networking communication success story, I guess.
Definitely. Very good. Okay. Do female illustrators, specifically Rose O'Neill, get relegated to female topics to illustrate such as household ads or romance novels?
Absolutely. Babies especially, but yes, women and children, family, anything related to families, that's what most of the women were illustrating back then. They did other things too, and especially, like I said, with sort of concealing their gender through their signatures, they were able to do other types of work as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And so do we have other female illustrators in our collections?
Yes, we do. And I'm always trying to find more. But from this period, we have an artist named Jessie Gillespie, who also, with the name Jessie, was able to kind of conceal her gender as well. And she did a lot of, almost like what my background is, she did a lot of silhouette work for things like Life magazine and stuff like that. Then there's a lot of Jessies. So there's Jessie Wilcox Smith and, book illustrators at the time. And yeah, there were some illustrators at the time, and we do have some of their materials in our collection. Definitely harder to find, though.
Makes sense. Jan asked, what magnification did you use with the digital images?
I don't know. That's a great question. And, there's basically two places you can go to, but I don't know what they were. And I could find that out, though, if you would like to know.
We'll figure it out and let you know, Jan. Definitely.
Yeah.
Dan asked, have you ever been, someone
Danielle, she knows.
Danielle, the microscope goes 40 times to 140 times. Okay, that's a huge range right there.
Thanks,
interesting.
Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle. Danielle is in charge of preservation and digitization, so perfect for her to answer. So thank you. Dan asked, have you ever been out to Bonnybrook, and is it worth a visit?
I haven't, and I feel really terrible about that. I would love to go, and I do plan on it soon, but I've heard lovely things.
Very good. Well, the picture looked nice, so we can go there. Can you talk a little bit about the practice of collecting tear sheets? And actually, we've got two of those questions because someone else asked, Were those created by artists to document their own work, or is that something the library does to try to control volume of material?
That's a good question. It's from what I know and from what we collect, there's basically two sources. There's the artists themselves, and they would collect them and save them as a portfolio. So for instance, we have Bernie Fuchs, his entire collection of tear sheets from his body of work. And then we have other collections like the Walt Reed Illustration Archive, which were collected over the years by Walt Reed, who was a commercial gallery owner and scholar of illustration. So as a fan and as a scholar, he would collect collect tear sheets and keep them for research purposes. So those are the two sources we usually get tear sheets from.
Someone else thanks you for your great presentation, and you may have said this, but they were a couple of minutes late. Where did O'Neill receive her training, and did she have known artistic influences? And I don't know that we necessarily covered that.
We didn't, and I'm not exactly sure. I just know that she, I don't know if she was maybe self-trained, because the way she got her start was winning a contest, an illustration contest, when she was 13 years old, and then was able to just start working after that. I do know that her sculpture, she did study under Rodin.
Very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Denise commented that my grandmother referred to the prizes giving out at carnivals as Kewpie dolls. Were the dolls actually used that way? Do you know?
I don't know specifically that, but I do know that they were sort of universal dolls, so they were able to be collected by all types of people everywhere. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the ways they were given out.
Okay. And so what is it that made the Kewpie doll so popular? I mean, clearly she was able to capitalize on it enough that it made her a millionaire at one point.
Yeah. So I think first of all, they're just cute, and they became so popular. So that's why she made the dolls. But like I was saying, she really believed in everyone having access to Kewpie dolls. So she made sure that there were some that were as cheap as a nickel for people who could afford less expensive things, and then other Kewpies that were much more expensive. So I think the reason that it was so successful is because of that, making it accessible to so many different people.
And so was becoming a millionaire common for illustrators at this time period?
No, especially women, I would say. No, they're not common at all. And I think, I forget how much she made. It was like 1.2 million, which is about, I've heard 35 million with inflation for today.
Okay, and Tony, that is huge. In fact, Tony commented in the chat that his high school mascot is that the Rockbridge Kewpies. Is that right? I think that's it, in Columbia, Missouri, because I lived there for a while. That they have the mascot as the Kewpie. How did this come to be, and wasn't it copyrighted by Rose?
I'm not sure how that came to be. It might have had something to do with the fact her ties to Missouri. And from what I know, because one of the reasons that she lost all her money was because she didn't have control or copyright of the Kewpie dolls. I think that's the truth. Like I don't know for sure, and I could probably find out, or maybe someone in the webinar knows, but yeah, I think that she didn't own a copyright for it at the time. So I don't think it applied.
So any sort of products, like, isn't there a Kewpie mayonnaise or something? Is that right? Or okay,
yeah, Kewpie mayonnaise.
So is that something that was copyrighted, or is that something that was just used kind of like other things? Do we know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Someone here might know.
We'll just share all sorts of things, because someone else actually said, did she have anything to do with the Kewpie restaurant chain in Ohio? And they shared the link to it. And I'm going to paste that in the chat so people can look it up and someone can
I didn't know
dig
about.
into it.
That's so cool.
So someone can do a little research for us, and Skye will put you on on a retainer to figure out where all these stories are, where did these run and what does it really mean? So
Yeah. There are lots of fans of hers, especially fans of the Cupies. And they've done, so one of the people I met through this whole process has actually compiled every story that she illustrated for Puck magazine. And that's a huge list. So I can't even imagine doing it for more than more than one magazine. But yeah, there are a lot of people out there who are doing this research. So hopefully it'll get back to us.
That sounds great. So do we have anything else in the collection other than her illustrations, like manuscripts, any written materials, anything like that?
Not much for this collection. So it mostly consists of the photographic proofs, the original illustrations, books, and some of the periodicals themselves. So instead of tear sheets, the full periodicals. And when you look at the finding aid, you'll see a complete list of everything, but that's essentially what is in the collection.
Another question, you talked a little bit about the differences in printing process in the magazine versus a book, but are the styles different as well?
I'm not sure the question. So the styles of the magazines versus the books. It's hard to say, we only have such a small sampling of everything. I'd say it looks a little different, like maybe the book illustrations are a little more realistic or representational. They all are representational. So yeah, I don't really know how to answer that one.
Well, we'll have to let her elaborate a little bit if she would like in the chat. Christine volunteered that she saw an exhibit of Rose O'Neill's work at the College of the Ozarks near Branson, which might help you in researching the works, or for us farming out to any interested person who also would like to get in on the action a little bit. So we definitely would love all our unpaid interns or something to start with this. So talk a little bit, if you don't mind. You showed how Andrea had processed the collection. So it looked like it was in a box with a clear lid. And you talked about how you preserve some of the pieces, the more fragile pieces on, acid paper because you've mounted them on some sort of mat. But how do you actually go about processing the collection, preserving it, making sure that it is safe and stored properly so that researchers can use it for generations?
Sure. Yeah. So what Andrea will do is do an assessment. So like sort of an inventory, a preliminary inventory and a condition assessment of all of the items in the collection. And that helps us come up with the organization, which is called series in archives. So it's usually original artwork and reproductions and things like that. And then what she'll do is after she's sorted it, she's going to start to prepare everything. So if it's a work on paper, what she'll make is a hinge mat. So it's 2 pieces of mat board, one with the window cut out. And all of these things could be, all of these things are archivally safe. So they're really nice materials that are made for this purpose to keep things safe and in good condition for a longer period of time. So once it's matted, we'll put it in an archival safe box. And if it's something on board, we just put it on top of one other piece of mat board and put it in a box. So, and everything is a little bit different. So every collection you get, you might have to do something slightly different in order to preserve it. We also have our preservation unit. So if there's something that has adhesive on it or something looks pretty damaged and we want to keep it from getting more damaged, they'll do some treatments on it as well. And then finally, Andrea will catalog everything. So she'll describe everything in the collection and put it on the finding aid so that people can then see what's in it.
And so was this collection, or the portion of the collection that we acquired, was it in really great shape when we got it? Did you have to do a lot of work, or?
I'd say it's in pretty good shape. Yeah. There were a couple of things. I think that fine art sculptor kind of drawing had to have a little bit of work done on it, but for the most part, everything was in really good condition. All of the books and the magazines are still intact. And yeah, so I'd say yes, it's good.
That sounds great. And Lisa shared in the chat that all the answers to our questions about Rose O'Neill can be found at Bonnybrook in Branson, which is run by the Bonnybrook Historical Society. And she provided that the website for that is roseo'neill.org. So please feel free to check it out, and we'll add it to our things to do list for us, Skye.
Yeah, thank you for putting that in there.
That's
we'll have
great.
to get in touch.
One question related to kind of the Modern Graphic History Library. So can you talk just a little bit so everyone understands like what it is, how did it come to be, what we aspire to collect, and what is the purpose of us sharing these materials? Like, what is the value of these sorts of collections to the world, to scholarship?
Yeah, so basically, big question. But what we try to do here is collect and preserve the history of visual culture of the modern period. So basically, like I said, the printing technology, since that had started, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
To talk about more of like how the Modern Graphic History Library got started, what we collect, and why we collect what we collect.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was started back with the Al Parker collection. He was an alum of Washington University, and his family donated the collection to our university archives. And our founding member, Douglas Dowd, and Jeff Pike, who was also a professor and dean here of the art school. And then the library as well got together and decided that this is an area we want to build and collect. And since then, it's just grown. A lot more people, a lot more researchers are using visual materials in their research. So it's not just about the art or the illustration, it's also interdisciplinary. So people from American culture studies or gender studies, things like that, they can use these materials to learn about what was happening in society at the time they were printed, especially because these are all popular magazines, they're popular media that was mass produced for the regular person, as opposed to fine art, which is a completely different thing, and so what we do is collect these materials and keep them for analysis for people to do some really heavy duty scholarship and research. We've even started a new program here called, it's the MFA in Illustration and Visual Culture. And these students, it's a master's program and they're illustrators, but they're also using these materials that we have to analyze and inform their work, and also take it to the next level and learn from it and teach and and start to treat it like with the respect it deserves, basically.
That's nice, because it's kind of nice that we are looking at it from a physical standpoint of artwork and the process and the kind of preservation and the printing techniques, but we are also looking at what is behind it. Like as someone else had mentioned before, are female artists relegated to certain types of work? So it's interesting from so many different angles. So I personally think it's exciting that we're a library and not just a museum, because it really encourages real study in depth. So anyway, with that, I'm going to let you wrap things up, and thank you so much for doing this. We've had a couple of people who had to pop off because they have some bad weather heading this way. And we did have Danielle, who was able to chime in the chat, mentioning that the only thing we had to do in preservation was tape removal. And sadly, the staining from non-archival adhesives could not be removed at this time. So, unfortunately, someone else has shared the link to learn a little bit more about our joint MFA with the Sam Fox School in illustration and visual culture. So thank you so much, Aggie, for sharing that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for coming and for participating and giving me all your questions.